In Lesson 6.4, you will identify congruent polygons and find missing measurements in congruent polygons. Congruent polygons are two polygons that have corresponding sides that are congruent and corresponding angles that are congruent. One way to show that the sides are congruent is to use these little tick marks. This side is congruent with this side is congruent with this side, and this side is congruent with this side. The way to show that the angles are congruent are the arcs in the angles. Angle A is congruent to angle F, angle B is congruent to angle G, and angle C is congruent to angle H. If their sides are congruent and their angles are congruent, the corresponding sides and corresponding angles, if those are congruent, they are going to be congruent polygons, and you can write what is called a congruence statement. Right over here is an example of a congruence statement. It says triangle CBD is congruent to triangle PQR. The thing that you want to keep in mind when you write a congruence statement is you need to match up corresponding angles. So angle C matches up with angle P, and you can tell that by looking at the little markings in the angles. B matches up with Q, so B and Q match up, and then D and R match up. So they're in the same position of the congruence statement. Example 1 says determine whether the triangles shown are congruent. If so, name the corresponding parts and write a congruence statement. Well, I can tell the angles are congruent because they have these little arcs showing these two are the same, these two are the same, and these two are the same. And then the lengths of the sides are 4, 6, and 9. 4, 6, and 9. So since corresponding angles and corresponding sides are congruent, they are congruent triangles. Let's start out by first writing down the congruent angles. Angle X is congruent to angle M. This is the longest part of this assignment, is writing out all of the congruence statements. And then also angle Y is congruent to angle N, and I know that because of the angle markings. This symbol right here is for angle. And then angle Z is congruent to angle L. We also can write congruence statements with the sides. So this side right here, XZ, so line segment XZ is congruent to ML. And then let's move on to this side that's 6 centimeters long. XY is congruent to MN. And the last one, the one that's 9 centimeters, YZ is congruent. YZ is congruent to NL. Now, because they're congruent, I can write a congruent statement. The congruent statement looks like this. Triangle, I'm going to call this one XYZ. Triangle XYZ is congruent to triangle. Now when I name the second triangle, I have to match up corresponding angles. So X matches up with M, so I'm going to put M down first. And then Y matches up with N. And Z matches up with L. So there's our congruent statement. You may want to try the next two on your own. The first one says determine whether the polygons shown are congruent. If so, name the corresponding parts and write a congruent statement. Well, because of these markings on the sides, I know that the corresponding sides are congruent. And the angles, we have 40 degrees, 50 degrees, and 90 degrees in both triangles. So therefore, it is going to be congruent triangles. If you're going to list all the corresponding parts, we would start out by saying angle P is congruent to angle C. Angle Q is congruent to angle B. And angle R is going to be congruent to angle D. I can also show the corresponding sides. So this one matches up with this one, so we can say QR is congruent to BD. PR is congruent to CD. And the last one, PQ, is congruent to CB. And then the congruent statement is triangle PQR is congruent to triangle. Now the one that matches up with P is C, the one that matches up with Q is B, and the one that matches up with R is D. So again, you just have to make sure you are matching up the corresponding angles when you write your congruent statement. The second example over here, the angles are all congruent, but we have side lengths of 8 and 4, and then 7 and 4. So these two are not congruent. They're not congruent because the 7 and 8 are not the same. Now the last thing we're going to do is the opposite. Instead of proving two things are congruent, we're going to say they're congruent, and you need to find the missing parts. So in this example, these two triangles are congruent, and you need to find the measurement, that's what that M stands for, the measurement of angle Q. Well, Q is going to match up with angle A, and I can tell that by the congruent statement. They're both in the first position. So I need to go and look at angle A to find out what Q is. Angle A is 40 degrees, therefore angle Q is also going to be 40 degrees. Now the next thing I want to find is RN, the length of RN. Well, RN is the last two, so I want to look at the last two in the other triangle. So I want to look at the length of FH. Well, FH is 9 inches, so that means RN is also going to be 9 inches. You may want to pause the video and try the next three on your own. It says in the figure, quadrilateral ABCD is congruent to quadrilateral WXYZ. Find each measure. So we're going to find the measurement of angle X. Well, angle X matches up with B because they're both in the second position in the congruent statement. So if B is 145 degrees, angle X is also 145 degrees. Now we're going to find the length of YX. Well, YX is right here. YX is the 2 in the middle. So we're going to look at BC. BC is 4 meters, so that means YX is also 4 meters. And the last one is the measurement of angle y. Well, y is the third one, so it's going to match up with the third one in this quadrilateral, which is C. So now if I look at this, uh-oh, we don't know C, but we can figure this out based on information we learned earlier in this chapter. Quadrilaterals have an angle sum that always adds up to 360 degrees. And this one right here is 90 degrees. So we can figure out what C is by adding these three together and subtracting it from 360 degrees. Or start out with 360 and subtract 145, subtract 70, and subtract 90. And you end up with 55 degrees for angle C. So if angle C is 55 degrees, angle Y is also going to be 55 degrees.